But I would say that a lot of people aren't in the career that's ideal for them based on their skill sets, definitely based on their income level, the amount of autonomy and freedom they have. So it's basically a combination of, what I just see with my own eyes.
I have an interesting show for you coming up. Our next guest, he talks about how he went from being a drug dealer to becoming an author making 6 figures a year. We discuss his self-improvement journey and how that journey eventually led to the end of his marriage. Not only do we talk about his marriage, we talk about how self-improvement impacted all of his relationships and why most people aren't living their dreams and living up to their potential. Now, before we get into that show, 98% of you guys aren't subscribed to the channel. So make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell. And if you're listening on any of the streaming networks, make sure you follow this podcast and give it a 5-star review. Anyways, my name is Duran Brown, and this is the podcast, Philosophy for Life. All right, man. So I read your book, and your book is very profound. I can relate to you in a lot of different things. So we're going to get into it. I want to say, when did you start living life by your own terms?
I would say probably the first time that I took a stab at writing to begin with. That was probably the first thing that I did where I knew it was aligned with who I was, what I wanted to do. Like one of those things, you kind of had in the back of your mind that you had thought about pursuing for a really long time. So once I just started doing that, even though I didn't have all of the results that, I would like immediately, it just felt good to be doing something that felt right. So that was like the first piece to it, even though, all of my circumstances around that didn't change immediately. But once I started taking into action that felt good, I instantly felt a lot better, even though other things about my situation hadn't changed 100% yet.
So what was going on before you started living life the way you wanted to live life? Like, who were you? What were you doing? Where was your mind at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I spent a good portion of my time basically just like messing things up, right? So I had a decent upbringing, everything like that. Everything was fine. I went to school, all that stuff. But I just started to make a series of decisions that, pointed my life in the wrong direction. Started doing very horribly in school, was on academic probation a couple times, ultimately ended up dropping out. Was selling drugs, got arrested for doing that. So I was set up in a position where things were going to be good for me, but I basically just went out of my way to mess it up. And so at that point, I was still living in the college town that I had dropped out of. Like all my friends had left. I was working this dead end, like mediocre sort of job. So like things basically weren't going all that well. So that's when I just started turning to self-improvement principles and just started learning and reading stuff just because I figured, if I got smarter and got better, like I could maybe fix my situation. So I started like trying to implement just that stuff like in my life and in my work. I had like a managerial job at the time that I was trying to implement that stuff for. And then I was kind of like sharing things I learned along the way while I was doing that. And it kind of led to an opportunity to write because I had a friend who reached out to me and like noticed some of the things I was posting, asked me to write for his website, and then the rest was history. But yeah, prior to then, I spent a good chunk of my time just like finding every way possible to screw up my life. Getting arrested, dropping out of school, drinking all the time. I smoked weed every single day. Got into a lot of bad situations prior to then. But then there was right around the 25, I was like, all right, if I don't snap out of this and figure out something different, like this is not gonna work out well. So it started to hit me that something different needed to happen, which is why I turned to self-improvement myself before I started writing about it.
Okay. You mentioned that you grew up with, you have a good background. You grew up with parents who were responsible, who set up a life in a way to help you be successful. And you also mentioned in your book that you're a good student. You said that there were signs early on in your life that you were a good writer. You always, you'll study an hour before an exam and you would get an A. What happened between the time where you were that person to where you became the person that was a drug dealer, you got arrested, you started smoking a lot of weed. Like, why did you make that transformation to the negative?
Well, one, I think it was when I just I started going to school, or when I first went to college, right? So like that was first like me on my own. Probably during high school, like maybe I had some more stuff that was like more structured. So like, I used to play sports. I used to have like things to do that kind of kept me in line. Maybe I don't know, but basically once kind of like my football season senior year ended, it was kind of like just one big party for me, and it kind of carried in, from the summer after high school and then getting to college. You go to school, you're by yourself. There's parties, there's girls, and I didn't really terribly enjoy working that much. So like selling weed felt like a great alternative for me to be able to kind of supplement my lifestyle without needing to have a job. And yeah, I just got in that environment, and I kind of fell prey to those temptations and influences, and then yeah, it just kind of snowballed where I was just getting more and more into it and getting less and less concerned with studying. Even back when I was in high school, like I was never like a really diligent student. I would say I was just smart. So like for basically in high school, you could kind of just, if you were just halfway competent, you could basically get A's and B's and stuff like that. So it wasn't really that hard. But then once I got to college, maybe it was more responsibility that at the time I just didn't want to take. So yeah, I really just wanted to spend most of my time partying and screwing off. So that's pretty much what I did.
1 second, my camera went off.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get that out of there. So that's not gonna be a big deal.
No worries.
Okay, so one thing that stood out in your book to me was that you said part of you chasing your purpose was actually it was negatively impacting your relationship. Did you really choose your purpose over your marriage?
100%. Yeah, I did. And I don't regret it either, looking backwards. Part of the time, part of that the relationship itself wasn't a great fit to begin with. I mean, like the marriage is like a result of like birth out of wedlock. So there was like some pressure to get married, stuff like that. So it wasn't necessarily the most amazing relationship on its own. But yeah, there was times where I was like hyper focused and hyper obsessive about what I was doing, to honestly to the detriment of my marriage, probably to the detriment of my relationship with my daughter, which has since improved quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, it was like the word that my ex likes to use to just describe it is like I was there, but I wasn't there. So it wasn't like I was just like always, it wasn't like I wasn't at home or anything like that, but it was like you could tell just being around me, I wasn't present. My mind was elsewhere. And I was like so dissatisfied with my situation that I wanted to do something about it. I also wanted to, be able to provide for my family economically and all that. So in my mind, like, I kind of twisted it in my head to make it seem like, okay, I'm doing this so we could live this big life and it'll be good for everybody. But it was 100% because it would be good for me. And I was acting out of my own self-interest. And yeah, my purpose 100% did come before my marriage and my relationship. And I think that you probably shouldn't do it to the severity and extent that I did. But I think in many ways there is something to be said about putting your mission first and not allowing really anything else to come before that. Because if you don't, then what will happen is you could look at it both ways. So on the one hand, you could crater your relationships by putting your mission first. On the other hand, you can crater your relationships by not having a mission and being kind of a yes man, happy wife, bum corporate job, dissatisfied, hollow shell of a man. Kids and wife don't respect. So you could really lose either way. So I guess I just wanted to go out swinging in the way that made the most sense to me, at least.
Okay, so you said that did you feel pressured into getting married? Was this something that your family put on you, or was this pressure that you put on yourself?
It was pressure from um, her family and her. My family
Mm.
actually, my family actually advised me to like rethink it and be like, you know, just because you had a kid doesn't mean that you have to get married. Like, think about it, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, I was a coward about it. Like, I should never have gotten married. I knew long term that I didn't want to be married. But I did succumb and cave to that pressure like 100%.
Okay, so when you went from this transition of reading self-improvement books, you know, ending your relationship, as you were becoming your better self, did you have was there things that you had to hide from your then spouse, your friends? Because one of the things in your book you mentioned is hiding keeping your dreams to yourself. Like, how was that journey?
Yeah, so I mean, in the beginning, I was just kind of like keeping it myself, and like my attitude was, I will I will talk about certain things like after I gotten a certain set of results. So like when I launched my first book, then yeah, I talked about it, but the book was already done. So like I didn't tell people, oh, I'm gonna write a book to give them an opportunity to like poo poo on it or whatever. But after it was done, I was like, I wrote a book, published it, come check it out. Um, I just think very like it's just very important to it. And people aren't haters where they're like extremely actively trying to take you down. It's just like little subtle things that'll slip in a conversation, like, oh, yeah, I don't know, like that might not be the most realistic thing in the world. You know, lots of people don't make it doing that, and they're like, and then half of it is like out of concern. Like even with my own parents, they didn't they didn't like actively push me away from it, but they didn't want me to do something that they felt was like not secure or whatever. They wanted me to get that corporate job. And like even eventually I did end up getting like a nice job. I was a marketing director in an agency. I was making decent money, all that stuff. And then like when I kind of announced that I was transitioning to writing full time after having this like secure gig, you know, my folks weren't necessarily thrilled about it. And but another reason why people not why people will naysay you or why they won't believe you is because most people are we allowed to curse on this show or no?
Go ahead.
Most people are full of shit, you know? So they don't like it isn't reasonable for most people to like when you go run around and say, oh, I'm gonna be a writer, I'm gonna start a business, like honestly, the default response probably should be for them to be like, oh, like, are you really gonna do it? Because most people are usually all talk. So my like philosophy now is, and it has been for a while, is just like kind of work in private, do the thing. Then when you're done with it, you tell everybody. Like once I finished projects, I would tell everybody that I was gonna do it. But you know, a lot of people just like to talk shit, and I'm just trying to like not be that person. So I just
I hear
mostly.
you. I hear you. This part of your book stood out to me because I was a collegiate athlete, and people used to call me Gangster D. That was my nickname when I first got to college. And then once the NFL didn't work out, and I started reading more books, started doing things that people didn't expect me to do, and people could see my life was changing. Like I was becoming a different person. I got a lot of hate from it, basically from family and friends. You know, at first what I was trying to do, I was actually trying to share information with them, like, oh, this helped me, this could help you, you know, yada yada, trying to grandstand, I guess. But I realized that people weren't wrong. I was the one that was wrong. And it's true. I was changing. You know, those people had been who they were the whole time. You know what I'm saying? And it took some maturity for me to actually accept like the I don't want to say the waves of life. You know, life flows, and you know that's part of life. If you're going to evolve and become a different person, a better person, as you climb higher, there's just going to be less people that you can relate to. How has your relationships changed since you've been a an author? You know, you're making good money being an author and writing blogs and whatnot. How has your relationships changed since then?
Yeah, I think like there's a couple things that happen. Like number one, like if anybody was like overtly like anyone who was like overtly toxic towards me or like I felt like was draining energy for me, I would remove them from my life. So there wasn't like a ton of cases like that, but there were a handful. And so like that part of your circle changes. And then kind of like as you just do things, like think as you change your behavior, like certain things started to fall in just start to fall off, right? So when I was drinking a lot and hanging out with people who like to do drugs all the time, well, when I stopped drinking and stopped doing drugs all the time, I naturally just lost, a common bond or thing to do with those people. So it was nothing malicious. They just kind of dropped out of my life. So more so like my kind of thing now with my circle is like, you don't have to be like me. Like not all of my friends are running businesses or stuff like that. But like most of my friends that I hang out with, they tend to be pretty active. They're in pretty good shape. Then maybe they don't run a business, but they are, solid in their careers. All my friends that are dads are very present in their kids' lives, and no deadbeats in my circle, anything like that. So you just kind of like as you level up, the circle around you tends to change. And also what I've realized is that just kind of having the energy that I have now, and like a lot of the content I create, it sorts of just like you're kind of sending out a signal like for the type of people you want to be around you, and then you just sort of draw those people into your life. So I just naturally started to draw more people into my life who are more ambitious, who were into the same things I were. So it's kind of a natural progression. And then it's like, yeah, you change, and then your environment changes, and people around you change. And then even with people like back home, where you're talking about where you start making this transition, there's this saying like, no one's a prophet at home, right? So like when you're known, like when you were like, especially where you grew up at, which is why I think it's a good idea to maybe move away from where you grew up at. I
Yeah.
did. It's like people want to pigeonhole you to like whatever you were like, especially like your family and stuff, because they've known you for a really long time. And so for like you to suddenly switch up, they're just gonna have that tendency to want to keep you in that box. And like I used to get like angry about it or like resentful about it, but I've I've let people do that. And it's like I don't have to prove to my parents or anything that what I'm doing is what I need to be doing or legitimate or anything like that. And so I just do what I do. I love my people around me, and as long as you're cool with me and not being outwardly negative, we're cool. But if we don't have a ton in common, then like the amount of time we spend together might just naturally kind of diminish.
Yeah, I feel you. I know exactly what you're saying. In your book, you mentioned having an accurate perception of people, and that really hit me, man. I love the way that you articulate these lessons that you've learned. Can you explain what you mean by having an accurate perception of people and why you put that in your book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like it's just a good idea in life to try your best to see people the way they really are, as opposed to the way you like them to be or the way you think they should be, right? So that comes with like learning different rules about the way people live. So like if you want to persuade people, well then you should probably understand about people that they're self-interested. You should probably understand that people, if you want a certain outcome to happen, you want to look at like the incentives behind the situation. So I think what happens with a lot of people is like they have this like they either have this like idealistic view of like the way people are, and they kind of ignore things like human nature, and even the dark parts of human nature, where for example, like if you there is such a thing like if you give people an inch and don't set boundaries, they will take advantage of you, almost like they can't help themselves, right? So if you kind of look at human beings more as people who respond to incentives and have a certain nature, like people are self-interested, people they crave status, they want desire, and they want recognition for invalidation, they want a sense of belonging. And you could see like with lots of different movements today, for that sense of belonging and being in the group, like people are willing to do all sorts of things. So I just try not to sugarcoat that and like pretend people aren't the way they are. And I think a lot of people really just have they really operate under the assumption that the world about the way the world should work. Like the world should be fair. There shouldn't be any sort of inequalities whatsoever. People should all be noble and good and not do self-interested things and backstab and do underhanded stuff or make power moves. But like all this stuff does happen. So you're better off knowing that up front and learning to deal with people accordingly, right? There's this good quote that's like a paraphrase from Marcus Aurelius. He was like, well, if someone has X and Y character traits, when they do X and Y actions, like you shouldn't be surprised or caught off guard by it. But we do this a lot of times. We do this in friendships. We do this certainly in romantic relationships where you kind of go through and you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I did overlook a couple of those red flags, and then in retrospect, you're like, okay, yeah, I probably should. So, but be like, there are just things you need to understand. Like the more realistic you are about the way people are instead of the way you like them to be, you're better off. Even though sometimes those realities about human beings can be hard to swallow, for sure.
It's really hard to swallow, man. I can't remember which passage in your book you said this, but you said something around the lines of there's always going to be people who are self-actualized, and those self-actualized people are trying to help the people at the bottom. But no matter what you do, what you say, no matter if it's 100 years, 1,000 years from now, humans will always be humans. And the people who are working hard and doing all this stuff, they'll just have to accept the fact that that's how those people are, and just find an environment or another place to escape to, so that so that you can basically protect yourself from these types of groups of people, because that's how we're wired as a species in general. You mentioned poor people thinking in your book. What do you mean by poor people think? Like, what is it about that rubs you the wrong way?
I mean, I guess at this point, like it doesn't personally rub me the wrong way anymore. Like people are gonna do what they want to do, so they're free to. But I think a lot of people have a lot of limiting beliefs, especially surrounding like money and upward mobility, where you basically just don't think it's possible, or they don't want to do the work because there's so many opportunities. There are so many opportunities if you were so inclined to like level up your situation. You don't have to work at that job you don't want. You don't have to be doing anything. You could go other routes to level up. It'll be difficult, but it's possible. And then people won't think those things are possible, and then will opt to complain and say things like, oh, certain people are successful because they're cheaters, or because it's unfair, or because they're taking advantage of other people. And then you can't have anything you hate. So if you despise wealthy people, then you'll subconsciously sabotage yourself out of ever becoming wealthy. So that's why it's another idea, just to celebrate the success of other people and just let it be. But yeah, a lot of people, especially because like most people are trained in such a way where the only way they believe they can make income is through a job, and they're kind of brainwashed into thinking that's the only path, and then it just leads to maybe a life you don't want and a lot of complaining. And like my general rule of thumb is like, you can live whatever life you want, I don't care. But like, or go ahead.
Expand on that. You said that people are brainwashed. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that statement?
Yeah, so I mean, there's like a lot of society, there's a lot of programming that happens, from a very, very, very young age, right? The whole like go to school, to get good grades, get a job, everything will work out fine. But in reality, if you look at the way that it turns out for everyone, some people are happy, but some people, if you look at the way that it turns out for a lot of people, it just leads to a dead end road. And it's just insane, like, because like you said, it's not like I said, like with the pyramid thing, there's gonna be some people at the top, so like there has to be some sort of like narrative to make sure that there are enough people to kind of be like kind of be like the cogs and the wheels in the machine or whatever. So they're gonna tell you things like go to school and get a good job and be subservient, right? Like look at the way, like even if you look at the way like a classroom setting is structured, they're all the periods are equal length, which makes no sense because all the subjects shouldn't be equally important. So you're now trained to you're trained to be regimented. You're trained to do things like maybe homework assignments that may not add any value and that are just kind of like arbitrary. So like you go through this like series of continuing to learn these like arbitrary, like homogenous ways of doing things that might not really have a point. So when by the time you graduate and you're ready to go do a job that's maybe kind of arbitrary and doesn't really have a point or a purpose, you've already been trained to do arbitrary, pointless things for 2 decades. So by the time you get there, you're like, oh, okay, like I'll continue to do that. And if you think if you think about it, like you have to be brainwashed if you're willing to spend a third of your time doing something you hate for money. Like what other explanation would there be? Like if you have a job that's kind of okay, at least if you like it, that's fine. But if you're just like doing stuff that you really frankly dislike in order to make money, that's a fraction of what the service that you're providing is actually worth. Like, I don't know how to get anyone else to do that other than but to brainwash them.
I just did a show with Jordan Grumet, and he has a book called Taking Stock. And in his book, he talks about his experience as a doctor and working with dying patients that were laying on their dying bed and their regrets. And he was saying that a lot of people, they regretted working too much. They wish they spent more time with their kids. They wish they would have followed their dreams. And one thing that really stood out to me during our conversation was I told him a story about a good friend of mine. I told him like, hey, everything that I did, I recommended to my friend to do, but he didn't do it and his life hasn't improved and it's actually gotten worse. So for me, I'm thinking you just have to work hard. You're not working hard. You're not really trying. And Jordan, he checked me and he said, the difference between you and him is that you've always lived by your bliss. You've always, when you wanted to play football, you played football. You went to D1 college, you played ball. You didn't make it professionally, but look what that did to you. It changed your life. It gave you access to education, other things like that. He said you're a software developer because you enjoyed coding. You picked up that hobby. You learned how to play an instrument because you've done the things you want to do. Most people are doing exactly what you said. They're stuck in the machine. They're stuck in a specific way of thinking, and they can't think outside of that. So once they're out of that institution, once they get out of high school or they get out of college, they don't know how to build their life. They need somebody to assign them some kind of direction so that they can actually live a fulfilling life. And that kind of it kind of hit me because I've always been told, and I saw this in your book as well. You said that people should focus on what they're good at, not what they're passionate about. But one thing that he said was that the reason people are so sick is because they don't go for their passion. If more people went for their passion, they would be mentally healthy, and they may not get as far, but they would be a lot happier. They will learn different things, and it would take them in a different direction in life. How do you feel about that? Do you think what's the balance between choosing your passion and then choosing what you're good at?
I mean, I think there's overlap. I'd probably say like for me, writing was something I was good at and I was passionate about. But the reason why I say pick something you get good at is because the feedback loop is faster, right? So the feedback loop is basically like if you get a quick win, you're more inspired to do the thing again, and you'll win again, and you'll win again. So like the more naturally skilled you are at something, the quicker that feedback loop is the quicker you're gonna start to see positive results, and the further motivated you're gonna be. So like if you pick something there is a way of you could work your way at anything, but if it's something that's like very outside of your natural inclinations, like you could do it, but the feedback loop is gonna be so slow that you're probably gonna get discouraged and quit. And then when it comes to like the passion thing, you gotta be. You want to find the passion or some skill that at least probably helps you make money, or like that passion thing could be something like, maybe it doesn't have to be your job. Maybe like the thing that you're skilled at is what you do to build a career from. You'll be pretty happy. But then like if you have something that you're just super passionate about as a passion project, maybe just like keep that as a hobby. But yeah, I mean, you want to find the best the best path for both. But even take people who are like real passionate about sports, like usually most like let's take like D1 athletes or pro players. Usually usually pretty early on when they pick up that ball, they're just like, all right, I'm a little different. Like I don't look like the other kids around here. Like this seems to come like you still have to practice a lot. You're just naturally already better just out of the box, just genetically. And so like you're more it inspires you to practice to where if I was like, I have a passion for basketball. Actually, I love playing basketball, but I'm 5'10" and I'm not very coordinated. I like going to play. It's a lot of fun, but the feedback loop in order for me to get good enough to make money from it or do it professionally is just impossibly long. So that doesn't make sense for me to try to do it.
Why do you say most people hate their jobs? You mentioned that in your book. What makes you believe that most people are unhappy on a daily basis?
It's a combination of a couple things. Like one, I've looked up, the like research, like Gallup, pretty famous polling company. They say like the vast majority of people are dissatisfied with their jobs. And the other one is just like a lot of anecdotal evidence where I just kind of like look around. Like if you like, I just like tell people to like do an exercise one day, like go just walk around the street. Like I live in a town where there's the Mayo Clinic's one of the bigger hospitals in the world, best hospitals in the world. And like most of the people are employed by them. There's like a lot of corporate offices. And you see these people like they're wearing suits and they're like their heads are down, and, like they're looking at their phone, like they walk past you downtown. They don't make eye contact with you, and like they got to go to happy hour every day and get drunk to like numb their mind. So you can just kind of like observe. Now, this isn't to say that everyone hates their jobs. I've maybe like lightened my stance a little. I wrote that book a couple of years ago, and I've maybe lightened up a little bit on the idea of like everyone just absolutely hates their jobs. But I would say that a lot of people aren't in the career that's ideal for them based on their skill sets, definitely based on their income level, the amount of autonomy and freedom they have. So it's basically a combination of, what I just see with my own eyes. Like, that's kind of part of a trope that's like part of the zeitgeist. Even the Blink 182 song, like "Work Sucks." I know, like that's just like a theme. Like work sucks, working for the weekend. Like it's just kind of been a persistent thing in the culture. So that's kind of where I got it from.
No, I feel you. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm doing something I love to do, which gives me the freedom to do other things I love to do, like this podcast. You mentioned in your book the biggest lies people tell themselves. What I want to know is, what is the biggest lie you told yourself?
That's a good question. I think the biggest lie, what do you think? The biggest lie I've ever told myself. Well, I did try to convince myself that I wanted to get married and that it was a good idea. That was a pretty big one. Maybe it's kind of like, it's more like maybe I'm not, I kind of had this idea that like I was maybe like a lot more like altruistic and like doing stuff just because I wanted to make an impact and everything, which I do. But like I think part of me had to take some time to like admit that I also just like attention and just like money and like validation and status and all those things. And I think just being like honest about the fact that those are part of my goals as well. Other big lies that I tell myself. I'm trying to think. Huh. That's a good question. I don't know if I have a better answer right now.
Well, why did you mention in your book most people lie to themselves? What do you mean by that?
I think that people lie to themselves about what they want. And so maybe why I had a harder time answering that question is because like I'm pretty clear on what I want, and like to a large extent that I've gotten it, and like I've grown to learn to just admit, like people will say things that are like is clearly lies, like I don't care about money. It's like shut up. Like yes you do. Like maybe you don't want to be the richest person in the world, but like money is a primary concern and feature of everyone. And all these people who say I don't care about money, guaranteed if I walked up to them and said, hey, I have a $10 million check for you, it's real, this isn't a prank, do you want it or not? They ain't gonna say no. Right? So there's all these things where like people won't admit what they want because they then would have to have the conversation to themselves that they're not doing what is required to get it. So it's better off to pretend like you don't want it, right? So that's kind of like the fable of sour grapes, right? The fox couldn't reach the grapes at the tree, so he said the grapes are sour, they're not good, but he just couldn't reach it, right? So like a lot of people call sour grapes on a lot of things. Like if you look at it, money. Another one, you look at it, romantic relationships. A lot of guys, particularly men, if they were being fully honest, if they had access to a plethora of beautiful women, perhaps they might not have chosen the spouse they chose, right? So there's a lot of things where it's like based, like your opinions are often have to be, in my opinion, like based on optionality. It's like you can't really tell me you don't want something if it wasn't an option for you to begin with. And I think a lot of people take things that weren't options for them to begin with and then kind of act self-righteous and act like they don't want them when they just feel like those things are out of reach for them. So a better strategy is to just pretend like they don't want them. Money, status, dating, relationships, even in things your physical appearance. Like if people could snap their fingers and look like a fitness model naked, everybody would pick that option. But they're like, I'm content, body positivity. Like, all right, man, fine. That's what you want to. That's what you want to tell yourself, to be comfortable at night and tell yourself that. But I think underlying, we all kind of know a lot of those things are lies, and to a large extent, like lying to yourself, it's not necessarily the worst coping mechanism. Like better than, I guess, realizing it all the time. But yeah, I guess it's my answer.
Man, I mean, you can even go deeper. People will date certain people because they're in the same religion, and they may not want to be with that person, but they don't want to disappoint their family or their group. People do it even with majors. I had a friend Nigerian brother. He was ridiculously athletic. He didn't play college ball, but I remember when we were training for our pro day, when we had to perform in front of NFL scouts, we're training year round. This guy's eating cheeseburgers. He's lazy. He doesn't do anything, but he could run a 4.4 with no shoes on. Dude was that fast. And I got the feeling that he wasn't really passionate about medical, and he was being pushed into medical. And I was like, man, are you sure you want to do this? Because he should have been graduated, got his undergraduate. He's like, yeah, I love this, man. This is what I want to do. And he graduated. It took him 10 years to get that degree, a 4-year degree. And now he's doing his own side hustle with finance. But he wasted all that time chasing his parents' dream. You know what I'm saying? I think a lot of people that are in college, they're in college just because their parents want them to, they want them to do that. You know what I'm saying? When did you stop? I want to say during your evolution, when did you stop being so critical of people? Like when did that happen?
I would say it was probably in the last like year or so. I would say like I say my tone is lightened up a bit because like at the time where I wrote that book, it was very aggressive, very confrontational. And I think over time I learned a couple of things. Like one, people are just going to live their life however they see fit, and it is what it is. Two, like maybe I just realized that I'm not the smartest person in the world about everything. And three, sometimes there was like a little bit of pushback, like particularly with sometimes when I would talk about like mental health stuff, Like sometimes people would push back to me who like seriously had real like mental health challenges that, I just don't have. So like I started to change my perspective a little bit on that. I started doing last year. I started experimenting with psychedelics a little bit more, and I think that kind of just naturally like lightened my disposition and just made me a little bit more peaceful. But really, I guess now now I've realized sometimes multiple ways of messaging can help people. And like I know like some people, even if you take sports, right? Even if you take sports, right? The old way of coaching used to be just like 2-a-days every single day, full contact drills, like drill sergeant style. But now you look and some of the coaches, some of the coaches who are actually less of taskmasters, more like giving their players autonomy and not brutalizing their bodies, making them do all these drills constantly, are winning, right? So like some people respond differently. Like some people respond well to tough love, some people shut down. And especially when I've learned to do like consulting in different areas, like I consult, for example, writers. So some of them, if I'm too hard on them, it'll actually like demotivate them. So for some of them, like I need to be a little bit like more understanding of where they're coming from in order to be able to help them. And then I guess it's just like open up my perspective. Like I'm only just 1 out of 7 billion people, right? I can't be right about everything. So I think it's just a process of like maturity and just continuing to kind of like course correct my ideology as time goes on.
Let's talk about psychedelics, man. What was that all about? What made you start testing psychedelics? Is it because you just had the money to do it, or you had this deep calling to try something new?
I started dating a woman who was into them, and she asked me if I wanted to try some, and I was like, yeah. So we did it. We went out in like nature. We had like these real like long, deep conversations, and like interesting thing about psychedelics is like it's weird. Like it gives you kind of opportunity to like confront your wounds and traumas and like heal them and like actually like process them for once, right? So like I won't reveal the details of the conversation because they're like extremely private in nature, but we kind of like talked about some things with each other and like admitted some things that like maybe we hadn't even like openly talked about before, like a lot of that dark shadowy stuff that you've either been through or and things like that. It's just it has this way of like removing your one. Well, like I'll describe for the first couple of times I did we were doing like shrooms, your like sense of your like anxiety, self-consciousness, and like self-doubt, it goes down to like zero. Like it's really hard to describe, where it's just like it's just not there anymore. So then you can kind of like be open and talk about some different things. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of people have been experimenting with psychedelics, in a therapeutic setting. People have been doing like ketamine, MDMA, mushrooms, LSD. There's like a lot of studies that it's actually proven to be like a more effective alternative to treat things like anxiety and depression than let's say something like SSRIs. So yeah, very illuminating experience. I got invited to actually go down to the jungle and do some ayahuasca. I had a conflict, so I didn't get the chance to go do that yet, but maybe we'll see.
That's the thing. I've heard a few people talk about ayahuasca, and this is in I forgot where in South America.
Like Peru, maybe.
Peru.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why did the relationship work out with that girl?
We kind of had an agreement going in that it was going to be more of like a casual thing and not a serious thing. Went on for a while. Turns out you can't maintain casual relationships forever without one person wanting to take things to the next level.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't at a time in my life where I was really contemplating a serious relationship, so it just kind of fizzled out because of that.
How do you manage your relationships after your marriage? So you got a girl pregnant, you married her because you felt like it was what you had to do, what her family pressured you to do, and you nutted up and got out of that relationship eventually. But now that you have a daughter, you've had that experience. How do you go about your relationships today? Like, how do you select women, or yeah, how do you go about that process?
Yeah, like it's very like nowadays it's very open ended to where I wouldn't say that like I'm actively looking, but if I were to come across come across a woman who fit the bill, I'd be in a relationship again. I'd be married again. Like I don't have any problems with anything like that. In terms of like how I select women, it's mostly like it's a lot of it is like the vibe check thing. Like one thing I like is like like a stable mood, more like stable mood, like even keel, because like I have like a very high stress, not very high stress, but like there's always like a lot of activity going on in my day to day. So I like to come to a calming presence. You know, someone who I like girls who are smart, actually know how to hold a conversation. Um, Looks are a factor, of course. You know, they gotta fit that bill as well. But yeah, so I just kind of like move about my life and just try to like make it a habit of like being out and about in places where like I might run into people like be friends with, run into people, one of the women I could date, all sorts of stuff like that. But kind of keeping things open ended. And if I'd probably say, because now I've been single for like, well, I've had,
Yeah.
girlfriends and such, but like nothing super concrete. So I've probably been single for what, like 4 years now. So like the first couple years I was like, nah, like I don't want anything, I don't want anything to do with relationships. I'm just gonna casually date. We'll use that word. But that I was in the when I got out of the marriage. But now that I'm removed from it, probably for the first time in a while. But if someone came along who was relationship quality material, then I'd be fine to pursue that further for sure.
Okay. I asked because I'm just seeing where your head's at, because I'm more along the lines of I'm actually trying, because I got so much going on, man. I have a lot of really good things going on in my life, and I don't want to bring the wrong person in that can negatively impact the things I have going on in my life. So I'm
Oh
just
yeah,
really careful who I
the
deal with.
wrong woman could fuck your whole situation up real bad.
The whole thing up, man. It tears shit down.
For
Yeah.
sure.
So
You
so
gotta
I'm
be careful with that for sure.
yeah, I don't sleep. I'm careful who I sleep with, you know what I'm saying? Because it's just addicting. That addictive, that addictive chemical that comes with sex is like, it's nothing to play with. Um,
Who
what I
needs
want to know, for somebody that is in your position, somebody that wants to get to your position, what kind of moves do you think that they should make? Say you're talking to your younger self. What kind of things would you actually recommend for somebody that's trying to get out of the mouse wheel and basically create the life that they want to create?
learn a skill that you can use to make money, and then follow the step by step process of getting that done. Like, so there's always going to be some variance. Like, you can't predict the future, but there are certain paths to success to where if you just studied how to do the thing and did it, you'd be able to escape your job. Like we have so many resources, from YouTube to podcasts to courses to coaches. There's all these resources available. So just use the internet. If you don't have money, watch free content online and implement it. If you got a little bit of money to spend, maybe you buy a course on a skill. Maybe you buy a programming course, or maybe you go to school. Maybe you want to go to school to do programming. Like that's like a high value profitable skill. So like learn one of those, stick with it, and then figure out how you make money from it. And really, it's kind of like such a cliche answer, but it's like you kind of just got to do the tedious, sometimes boring work day by day over and over again until it works. Like most things are learnable. Like I guarantee you, like you're like, oh, I want to learn how to run Facebook ads. Okay, if you watched 100 videos on how to take Facebook ads, make Facebook ads, and you took notes, and then you started creating your own Facebook ad campaigns and testing them out to see how they worked. You know how to do it, and then you could charge someone money for it. If you watch videos on how to code, or you went to school for coding and had someone teach you how to code and you stuck with it, then you know how to code, and then you have a skill that you can honestly make money both as a entrepreneur or as having a job. So you just have to learn. I think now, like learning a profitable skill that you might naturally kind of be good at and getting yourself just, I used to be kind of like the big like passion skills, everything, but now I'm just like, all right, build your skills that like make money and get out. Then like you decide, you can start thinking about your more esoteric goals. But like really, like my biggest, like if I were starting all over, number one, especially like if you're like fresh out of school, get a job in sales, learn how to sell stuff, because that's a skill. Like if you know how to sell stuff, then you'll never go hungry.
Yeah.
And after that, yeah, pick some profitable sort of skill, develop it, hone it, and really it won't take you forever. It's not about how it wouldn't take people so long as that they're so inconsistent. Because like if you spent like 6 months every single day learning about a certain skill and then reaching out to people, trying to get clients to do different things, like you'd start to see results. But most people, they just will not bring themselves to do it. And I wish that I could figure out a better answer.
No.
Bring people to do it, but they just won't do it. And there's nothing you could do for something who won't do anything. But it's all out there. All the paths to success are out there. Like literally right in front of you, there's people telling you step by step how to do anything. You can go on YouTube and literally learn how to, like, I was like, I wonder if you could build a rocket or do rocket science. So I like, because I try to come up with this ludicrous example. Like, you can learn how to do anything and put on my blog post. It's like, oh, look, I wonder if you can learn how to like build a rocket from scratch. Go on YouTube. Sure enough, there's like a billion videos. They're like, all right, if you want to build a rocket from scratch, here's how you do it. And if you were to follow the video and take enough stabs at it, then you could do that too. So like, there's, aside from the only things that really you need to be like a genetic freak in order to succeed at art is like being a professional athlete or like a singer or like a Hollywood star. But like aside from that, basically everything else you can learn how to do.
I don't even know if you can put music and Hollywood star in there. You really just need to look good for that. Well, yeah, that's genetic. Yeah, I guess that is genetic. Yeah, man, it's a trip. You know, I completely agree with you. You need to pick a skill that increases your income, that gives you the flexibility to do what you want to do, to think and create the life that you want. I got lucky as a software engineer. You know, I'm a high income earner, first person in my family to do many different things. You know, first to buy a house, and it's just flew my mom out, and she was like, "Oh man," you know, she just couldn't believe it. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I'd never picked up on that hobby like a decade ago, you know? So I completely feel what you're saying. I think that everybody should invest their time into something that's going to help them make some money and then start planning out their life. You say, one of the things that you said in your book was like the fragile lifestyle. And it just spoke to me, man. The way that you articulated what that looks like, it was, it gives you a clear picture of how life looks and feels for most Americans that are, I would say, college graduates, high school graduates. Can you elaborate on what the fragile lifestyle is?
Yeah, 100%. So I learned a lot of those ideas from this book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. Really, really, really good book. Probably one of my favorite books. But basically, there's like 3 different types of like systems, right? So there's like fragile systems, robust systems, and there's anti-fragile systems, right? So a fragile system is one where like if you shake a box with glass in it, like it's gonna break. That's fragile, right? If you try to like a rock, for example, is robust. So you can do whatever you want to it; it's kind of going to stay the same. But then anti-fragile is something that, with the more volatility, you add volatility and chaos to it, it can actually get better, like the entire system does. So you can look at even like economies as something that are like anti-fragile, or markets, right? Not every individual business is going to succeed, but because there's all these different mechanisms working out once, like the system kind of advances, right? But like what I'm saying with the fragile lifestyle, basically the fragile lifestyle is the type of system that works until you add a little bit of volatility, and then it all goes to shit, right? So if you work a job and you have a steady income, but you're up to your neck in debt, you have a mortgage, you have these college payments, you have all this stuff, you're living check to check, living beyond your means, all this stuff, everything is fine. But the minute you lose your income, you could be a couple of paychecks away from being basically out on the street. Contrast that with someone like me. There's a lot more volatility in my life, where I don't make the same exact amount of money every single month. But it's kind of like that analogy of like street signs make people actually be more careless with their driving because of the illusion of safety. But when there's no street signs, you're kind of going free for all. Like you see people like in India, or like driving on the Autobahn, there's almost like a weird safety that comes from being in that chaotic nature, because you're always like having to pay attention. So the fragile lifestyles where people they develop a false sense of security, and until you add some variance in there, I think things can go south really quickly. And I think we've seen examples like that with housing crisis of '08, or even if you look at what things COVID, the different things like that. I had personally had friends who they lost their jobs during the pandemic, and their unemployment checks didn't come right away. Some of them were delayed like 9 months. It's like, okay, what do you do in that situation?
Wow.
Right. So basically a fragile lifestyle is a lifestyle where if the elements are tweaked just a little bit, like things can get bad. And that's what a lot of people are they're sitting ducks, right? They have one source of income. They have all this debt tied to that source of income. They might be in a profession that is soon to be obsolete, and they don't know it because they're not staying up to date on it. So like there's just a lot of different elements in there that make them fragile.
No, I feel you, man. I was in a situation where I was working for a company, and the two supervisors that hired me, they had left. So a week later, I had a new supervisor, and he found out that I was taking time off because I had purchased a home, and he wasn't too happy about it, but he forced a smile. And then when I came back, they let me go. Luckily for me, I never have just one source of income. So when he let me go, I kind of just smiled and I asked why. He said, "Oh, because of this and this." So I was like, "Okay, cool." And then I got another job within 4 days. So that's just how it is in the field that I'm in. But it's definitely, it let me know. I was like, man, if somebody else was in my same position that didn't have my skill set, that would wreck their entire life. They just got a house, they had a mortgage, they probably had to pay to move everything into that house. It's like I could have wrecked everything.
Exactly.
One last thing that I have for you. You talk about being selfish. And we talk about, when we hear the word selfish, we tend to think something negative. We think about basically somebody who's in it for themselves, screw everybody else. And there's some kind of like evil associated with it. Why do you believe people need to be more selfish?
Yeah, I think being selfish, one, like once you I feel like once you have your own needs met, then you don't need to look outside of yourself to get those needs met, and so you can have a lot of problems there. Two, like a lot of things, like if you just operate on your own self-interest, it's good for you, right? So like let's say you want to make a lot of money, and you're self-interested about it, but you know that in order to make money, you actually have to create something that people want and that provides value for them. and that they enjoy on some level. So you do still have to do something that benefits someone else in order to get that money. And then I think what also happens when people don't put themselves first, they start to develop, like, I call it like a martyr complex, right? So you ever have these people who, like, they bend over backwards for basically everyone else but themselves, then it leads to resentment towards the people they're helping, and it just leads to them being kind of miserable because they're just not getting what they want. Like, this is often what happens with let's say like the nice guy syndrome sort of thing. They're trying, they're pretending to be nice and helpful because they want something, and rather, instead of just being like selfish and just like admitting what they want and going for it like directly, they try to do this thing where they want to have like this false pretense of giving and think that it's supposed to come back to them. And then when it doesn't, they get upset about it, and then it turns out like they're not so nice after all. So you're gonna have these desires, and I think the best way to reach like this like monk-like state of contentment is to actually get what you want, and then realize it still wasn't the answer. And you're like, okay, maybe I got to figure out it's another way. But I think like a lot of people, like, they just have these itches that they have these itches that go unscratched, and then I just feel like it leads like to a whole host of different problems. So I think that you should not like just be ruthless about it and like not take any other people's considerations into feelings or their feelings into consideration at all. But to an extent, like getting what you want, solving your own problems, getting your needs met first makes it a lot easier and better to interact with people and just have a better off, more well-rounded life.
This is the last question, I promise.
No,
Why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because I felt like and this is like kind of when I was in my, like, I don't know, dark night era or something, but like I just felt like there was a lot of just like nonsense in the self-improvement industry where they were just not adding any context, where I just felt like they were just like lying about what life is really like and about what it really takes, or there was just kind of too much of this like rainbow bubblegum cotton candy. Oh, if you just believe and achieve and say your affirmations in the morning, like then you'll be, like, that's not how it works. And I knew it wasn't how it works. And I knew a lot of people were kind of done listening to like empty platitudes and wanted to hear that real. And it was kind of a culmination of my writing at the time, where a lot of people would be describing it like it was like kind of aggressive and confrontational, yet encouraging at the same time. And I kind of just felt like, telling people what maybe I felt they needed to hear instead of what they wanted to hear. And I felt like the industry was missing that. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring and share my 2 cents, kind of juxtaposed against those other ideas.
Okay, man. All right. Well, this is the end of the show. Thank you for coming on. Like I said, I love your book. I can relate to a lot of things you said, and it also cleared up the questions that I have for myself and helped me deal with my own journey that I'm having, my own self-improvement journey that I'm going through within my relationships. So thank you for that. Any closing words?
No, just thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on the show. And to anybody who's watching this, you pretty much already kind of sort of know what you need to do. So, the quicker you get into doing it, the better off you'll be. So hopefully that's today.
Okay, man. All right. Well, that's it for the show, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good one.
Later.